A common game design problem is that of resource placement, and this spot in the game is a good example. Players have just left an area where they acquired the Combine submachine gun, and whenever they get a new weapon, we try to give the player the opportunity to experiment with it right away. So, right after the SMG, we make sure to give the player a bunch of ammo for it and a supply of not too threatening enemies, in the form of confined zombies and wandering headcrabs to experiment on. But playtesting has shown us that there's a wide range of ways that players respond to that setup. Some shoot a headcrab or two and move on, but some players take their time exploring the weapon, even using up all the ammunition we gave them. Now, after the headcrabs, the player is heading towards a new area, which features one of the hardest combat arenas in the game, where they must fight two revivers at the same time. How much ammunition can we expect the player to have here? How much should we put in this area between the two arenas to ensure all players will have enough to fight the two revivers? If we don't put in enough, player may be in a position where they cannot succeed at the upcoming encounter, and reloading their save games won't help them. They will need to go back and replay the previous area, this time conserving more ammo. That's not something we want to happen, nor is it something that we can expect all players to realize. Instead, many will repeatedly try and fail to be the two revivers. So, at its core, the problem with resource placement is that the dynamic range of resources carried by players can be significant, and it gets even wider as the game progresses. In Life Alyx, we would see some players end the game with barely any ammunition, while other players had over 1,000 unused rounds.
So how can we handle resource placement when there's such a wide dynamic range in player collection and usage patterns? Like many games, we opted for a dynamic system that looks at the player's current resource counts and makes decisions based on them. But the design of these kinds of systems can be tricky, because they tend to affect player behavior. For instance, in Half-Life 2, we placed breakable crates throughout the game which dynamically spawned resources based on the player's current health and ammo levels. This had the advantage of allowing us to not need a huge amount of playtesting for resource balancing, because as long as there were enough crates around, the player would always have enough resources. But because that system exists, we didn't have to spend much time on resource placement, and as a result, we didn't really craft challenges around resource collection. Players also learned that they didn't need to really care about the resource levels, because the crates were always going to top them up on whatever they needed most. For Half-Life Alyx, we wanted to revisit those assumptions. We knew that searching for resources in a VR environment was something players really enjoyed. So we wanted resource collection to be something players needed to do throughout the entire game. And that meant we didn't want them to ever reach the point where they had so much ammo and health that they didn't need to explore. We were also able to start playtesting earlier in the product development cycle than we had been able to when making Half-Life 2, which gave us the confidence that we'd be able to spend the time we needed to carefully place every resource.
For Half-Life Alyx, we moved to a system that allowed us to craft a more specific experience, using a dynamic layer that attempts to reduce the dynamic range of resource gathering between players. Instead of placing generic resources that switch types, level designers carefully placed each resource type throughout the world. Some are easy to find, and some are more difficult. Then, as the player moves forward in the world, the system opportunistically removes resources in the path ahead based on the player's current resource levels. This had the benefit of allowing level designers to have a lot of control over the player's resource amounts in different areas of the game. They were able to craft areas where they wanted the player to be starved of one ammo type or encouraged to use another. For example, in this area, designers could provide enough ammo to ensure that the player would have enough to fight 2 revivers, with the knowledge that the ammo balancing system would remove much of it if the player was already loaded up. We could safely give the players a large amount of combined SMG ammo in the previous arena, and know that the players who ran past the poison head crabs without firing a shot wouldn't find more here. There are a number of additional features to address complexities that result from this system, such as ensuring players always find something inside a Combine locker, or ensuring that players are still rewarded for searching carefully and regularly, even if they're carrying a lot of ammo. Ultimately, we want a player who is paying more attention to the environment to come out ahead resource-wise. We just needed some dials to be able to control how far ahead they got.
Up until this point, each Reviver encounter has been focused on teaching players something new about the Reviver so that they can defeat it. This arena represents the culmination of the training. There are no new rules, there is nothing to learn about the Reviver itself. By this point, players are armed with the knowledge required to progress. The challenge then shifts into a combat problem where strategy and execution are required. Players have to juggle and prioritize multiple targets, utilize all of their weapons, and manage a constrained supply of ammunition in order to prevail and make their way back out to the exterior of the hotel, so they can deactivate the Combine substation.
again, Alex.
Yeah, this one was kind of rough.
You're all right, though, right?
Yeah, Russ, I'm good.
Well, we've got to get you out of here and up to the roof.
I'm working on it. All right. Here it is.
Now just snip those cables and off we go.
One of the core subplots of the storyline is regarding the Combine imprisonment and use of the Vortigaunts to trap the G-Man. The multidimensional power of the Vortigaunts to detain the seemingly invincible G-Man is established in previous Half-Life lore. Through the use of their prisoner pods and substation technology, the Combine extract the power of the Vortigaunts' Vortessence chant, tune that energy, and then transmit it to the vault to contain the G-Man. To communicate this Combine process to the player without explaining it through lengthy exposition, we used musical sound patterns to represent the process implicitly. If you stand near the pods holding the Vortigaunts, you can hear them groaning their chant in a slow but semi-musical pattern. Just past the pods is the resonator, within which you can hear a distilled version of the chant energy. Finally, the cables are activated with the concentrated Vortigaunt energy, which is harmonized in varying patterns and intermittently transmitted to the vault once the energy is sufficiently tuned. If you stand near the cables while they're tuning, you'll notice the sheer size and height of the sound. This was achieved by placing the sound emitters for each cable at the locations of the actual cables themselves. The sound of the cables covers a broad frequency range, which emphasizes Steam Audio's head-related transfer function processing. That simulation, combined with the feedback of the observer's inner ear as she looks upwards, gives the same impression of scale that VR is known to give visual objects.
Now go inside and deactivate the power source.
Character performance within a VR game has a unique set of opportunities and challenges. In our efforts to keep control in the hands of the player, we must create a performance that is interesting enough to maintain players' attention, but flexible enough to allow for player freedom. This scene has the most face-to-face interaction in the game, and there is no physical barrier between the player and the Vortigaunt when he first appears. At one point, we played with the idea of a jump scare when the Vortigaunt is released, upending the player's expectations of what had been referred to only as a battery up until that point. Not only was it a bit ham-fisted, but the Vortigaunt came flailing out of the pod, frequently into the same space occupied by the player. To solve this problem, we cut the jump scare and slid the pod back out of the player's space as it opened, to allow for the Vortigaunt to emerge at a comfortable distance. We faced a similar challenge when determining how to get both the player and Vortigaunt to their next locations without intersecting. We wanted to get the player and Vortigaunt side by side overlooking the vista, while the Vortigaunt delivered critical exposition. It would have been awkward for the player and Vortigaunt to take the same route along the catwalk, so we looked at other options, including exploring ways that the Vortigaunt may have once moved in its native environment. With long forearms, it's feasible that the Vortigaunts may have moved around as quadrupeds, so we chose an agile four-legged scramble up to the higher platform where he can deliver exposition without contending with the player for space.
Good grief, it's a Vortigaunt.
We have been trapped in the dark.
You're free now. It's okay. Your friend sent me.
The Alyx Vance. You are our friend.
What are they doing to you here?
What they do to us all. The Combine drained from us the power they use to protect their weapon. There. We are ripped from ourselves.
We have to stop them from killing your friends.
The Vortigaunt will extract ourselves and exact our own vengeance. You must go to the weapon.
Well, I can't get into the vault if the substations are still online.
Do not worry, Alyx Vance. They will not be. We will not allow it. I will clear the path. Our paths diverge. Remember, there is no distance between us. We are coterminous.
Thanks. Good luck.
Trust in that Vortigaunt to shut down all the substations.
I trust him.
Yes, me too. Because if he doesn't, well, that vault isn't going anywhere, and we'll be standing there with no vault to break into, surrounded by Combine.
Russ, trusting him is our only plan here. He'll do this. We can do this.
Yes, you're right. He'll be fine. We're all going to be fine.
While developing Half-Life Alyx, we had a large number of people in many disciplines contributing to a relatively small number of maps. This meant that we frequently had multiple people working on the same map at the same time. One way that we managed this complexity was to break our maps into smaller pieces referred to as prefabs. A prefab could be built out of the same types of geometry, logic, enemies, particle systems, or any other elements as a regular map. As long as people were working in separate prefabs, they could make changes or additions without stepping on each other's work. A prefab could contain a large physical space like this whole street scene, or it could contain only a handful of elements. Large prefabs that partitioned a map to allow for collaboration were essential for a project of this scope, but many small, reusable prefabs were created for Half-Life Alyx as well. A good example of this was the set of reusable vehicle prefabs used here and throughout the game. Each vehicle was authored as a configurable prefab, enabling designers to quickly place them around the game. setting a few parameters to customize the vehicle for the context. Parameters include things like the vehicle's paint color, the amount of pre-existing damage, whether the doors were open or simply missing, and the type of ammunition or other resources the vehicle might contain. This sped up our workflow and also meant that updates to a prefab were automatically propagated out to all of the maps that used it.
Think, Russ? Guess we better cooperate.
Yeah, she sounds like she means business.
We had a good run.
Cooperate.
The tarps used by the Combine to cover buildings in the quarantine zone are animated procedurally. This animation was added relatively late in development, so it needed to be both computationally inexpensive and technologically conservative, so no new systems. Simple overlapping waveforms are used to displace the tarp geometry where it hangs loosely away from the building. The displacements are oriented along the wind direction, and their propagation direction is further modified by the gradients of a texture we refer to as a freedom of motion map. This map is derived from the shape of the building geometry under the tarp, and is used to attenuate the displacement so that the tarp won't animate in places where it is meant to be pulled tight against the building. The result is a flapping tarp that seems to conform to its surroundings and responds appropriately to the wind.
The Combine soldier you see here won't fight you. It's been programmed to run back and forth along the path shown on the ground in order to illustrate the stride retargeting system developed for Half-Life Alyx. One of the challenges of animating digital characters is making sure that their feet don't slide along the ground as they move. Humans are very good at picking out irregularities in the movements of virtual characters, especially in VR, and Combine soldiers in particular need to look like their feet are planting and their weight is shifting as they change direction. Otherwise, they appear weightless and unconvincing. In a pre-processing phase, Our stride retargeting system analyzes the steps of each authored animation and stores them as a direction-independent trajectory. At runtime, our system predicts where each foot will land on the next step based on the motion of the animation, the character's path, and the height of the ground. The pairs of colored boxes on the ground illustrate this process. The red boxes show the previous foot positions, the green boxes indicate the soldier's current foot position, and the blue boxes are drawn where each foot is predicted to land next. Once the predicted foot positions are calculated, the system guides the feet to the predicted locations using the trajectory information to preserve the style of the original animation. Once the foot lands, it is locked in place until the next step. In the end, this system was so effective that we could essentially make any animation walk in any direction without foot sliding. You can experiment with the system by moving around the area, since the soldier has been set up to always face you while running the specified path.
Put that to good use.